Today, it is our pleasure to be speaking with Dr. David C. Schindler. Professor Schindler is Associate Professor of Metaphysics and Anthropology at the Pontifical John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and Family at the Catholic University of America. He is the author of the text that we'll be discussing today, The Catholicity of Reason, from Eerdmans in 2016. Professor Schindler, thanks for being with us today.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
If we can jump right into this amazingly technical and also extremely fruitful book, in the first chapter, you introduce the concept of the Catholicity of Reason. Would you be willing to explain what is it that you mean precisely when you use this term Catholicity?
Right. The term, as you'll have noted, is with a small c rather than a big C. The word comes from the Greek katholon, which means according to the whole. And my intention in the book was to try to recapture a bit of the classical sense of the meaning of reason. So we tend to think of reason these days in very technological, scientific terms. Something is more reasonable or rational the more we can formulate it in precise scientific terminology. The more we can do experiments with respect to claims, the more that we can mathematize or in philosophy symbolize the language and make it extremely precise. And all of these are actually features and practices that have emerged in the modern world. In the pre-modern world, and by that I mean essentially up to about the Renaissance, the model for reason was not so much math and science as it was philosophy and theology, in fact. And there, the notion of reason is this drive to come to a certain intimacy with things through our minds and will. And to say that reason is Catholic means that we strive to get to the bottom of things, that reason is not content until it can see things as a whole, that it's got this drive that it won't come to rest except in the big picture, in understanding particular things as a whole. It doesn't necessarily mean that we will always grasp it as a whole, but insofar as we don't grasp things as a whole, we still have that this desire has not been sated, and that aspiration continues. If that makes sense there.
Good. What would you say to the modern materialist? What does there's been such a change in the way that we think since classical times and medieval times, and to the post-scientific or scientific era that we now live in today. And of course, one of the major shifts is that we're not sure if we have souls anymore, and we're by and large materialists. How is it that reason, as understood in its pre-modern sense, this grasping of the will and the mind for the whole, still makes sense to us today?
Well, I think that the very fact that we can raise a question as you did suggests that we can see beyond. We can compare materialism to something larger. It's quite evident, it seems to me, that we're not satisfied with what C.S. Lewis used to call nothing buttery, nothing but material, nothing but the laws of physics. That we have a sense that there's more to it than that, and the desire to know. It's, if we think about it, what does it mean to know something? What sort of contact are you making with a thing when you know it? It's very different from physical contact. It's not just the pushing and pulling of material forces. There's a thing is present to you somehow when you know it, and that it seems to me is already an indication that there's something in us, and in fact in reality, that transcends the merely material.
Is this argument for the Catholicity of Reason also in some way, by the same token, an argument for the existence of God? Can we believe in this universal reason that you describe without grounding the concept in God?
I don't think so. Right. The first thing that I would say, though, is rather than looking at it as a proof for the existence of God, it's that when we attempt to prove the existence of God, we're using our reason in a particular way. And what I wanted to talk about in the book is, or suggest in this book, is that there's some more basic questions that we want to ask, not so much how we ought to use our reason, but what is reason? And behind that question is a conviction that if we were to recover this Catholic sense of reason, this aspiration to the whole, the normal usage of reason itself would naturally opens up to the question of God. When you desire to know the whole and you desire to get to the bottom of things, the mind itself opens up to ultimate questions and ultimate causes and ultimately the question of God. So that would be the first thing. Now, granted that, it's also the case that you might ask them, well, why do we have this desire to know the whole? And I think in the end, there's no way to explain that other than through the positing of a creator, God, at the source of things, a first cause who is perfect knowledge and perfect love at the source of things. I think that's absolutely right.
Dr. Schindler, in chapter 3 of your book, which is entitled The Primacy of Beauty, the Centrality of Goodness, and the Ultimacy of Truth, you argue that the, quote, primacy of beauty belongs to the specifically Catholic character of reason. We know that you wrote your doctoral dissertation at the Catholic University of America on von Balthasar. In what ways do you appeal to Balthasar in this text to construct your argument?
Sure. Well, Hans Urs von Balthasar, as you certainly know, and your readers may know, it was a very profound and prolific theologian from the 20th century. He's not known so much in philosophy circles. I work in philosophy. He's a theologian's theologian, but his work, it seemed to me, had very clear philosophical implications. And one of the things that Balthasar achieved in his work, his famous trilogy, his Meisterwork, his main opus of his hundreds of books and thousands of articles, the trilogy is constructed around the order of beauty, goodness, and truth. And he thinks through assessing the whole history of thought, from the pagan antiquity all through the Catholic Middle Ages into then the modern era and the fragmentation that occurs there, and explains that we have an encounter. We ought to think of our initial encounter with God in terms of beauty, that in which God appears to us. The epiphany. He first shows us. He reveals himself. He's not simply a construct of reason, but he gives himself to us before we even know the right question to ask. And it's in that initial solicitation by God that our desire is elicited, and we then respond through our action. So that is the good. And in responding through our action, then we come to understanding, which is where the true arises. So it's interesting. It's not that we first have a concept of God. That would reduce God to our own terms in a way. If we began first with a concept of God, what's first is God's call to us in His self-revelation, and then we respond in goodness and truth. And it seems to me that what Balthasar was arguing in terms of theology actually makes sense for the way we interact with everything in a certain respect. And so I wanted to try to translate that into philosophical terms. Our encounter with anything is first a manifestation of its beauty that then draws us in through our response, our action, our will, and our love. And through this we come to an understanding of things. So that's the basic pattern that I've traced out in different essays in this book.
On the side, would you be willing to give us a reading recommendation of von Balthasar? Most of us are quite intimidated just by the length of the series. Where should we begin?
You know, Cardinal Ratzinger, then Benedict XVI, used to respond to that. Balthasar was one of his, so this is the Pope preceding the current Pope Francis. Balthasar was his favorite theologian, he said on many occasions, and when he was asked for recommendations, he pointed to the series of books that's published by Ignatius Press, Explorations in Theology, which is a collection of discrete essays and articles, and one can go through there and find something that sparks an interest. That's a good start. The other is this very slim volume that in a way encapsulates the whole. It's called Love Alone is Credible. It's a slim volume, and it's helpful because it encapsulates the whole in such a small compass. But I would warn you that book's a bit dense too. Best start with the essays.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And if I can ask a further clarifying question too, the Theological Aesthetics. How does his Theological Aesthetics, the 7-volume work specifically, do you make much use of that work in your own argument?
Oh, very much. The volumes 4 and 5, volume 1 and then volumes 4 and 5 are 3 of my all-time favorite books. And volume 1 is when he talks about what it means for God to manifest Himself and what form means. That's the appearance of God's mysterious depths appears in a concrete form, and specifically, as we know, in the human face of Jesus Christ. But then that has philosophical implications as well. And then in volumes 4 and 5, it's when he goes through you might say the literary and philosophical history through philosophy, mythology. It begins with Homer and the Greeks and Virgil and Plotinus all the way up to the modern era. It's really an extraordinary reading that gives you a sense of the whole again. Reason wants the whole, and in terms of that whole, it opens up a sense of where to place any particular figure or problem that you're thinking about. So those volumes in particular have been very helpful to me.
Dr. Schindler, at the conclusion of Chapter 6 in your book, you make the following incredibly intricate yet extremely powerful statement, if I can quote you here. Quote, "The reason that there cannot be evolution without creation is because, as we have seen, there can be no intelligibility of any sort without the absoluteness of substance, which the supra-temporal and indeed the supra-formal act of creation alone, if one does not affirm the eternity of species, makes possible." Would you be willing to unpack this a bit for us? Is there a simple way to explain this or possibly even illustrate the conclusion in Chapter 6?
Right. I apologize for the technical terms there, but it seems to me that you begin with an insight and you need to give a very rigorous account of it, and that's what I attempt to do. But to try to simplify, if I may, that's a technical way of putting a passage that G.K. Chesterton wrote that I quote here, and if you'll allow me to read just a couple of sentences. This is on page 161. Chesterton talks about evolution and creation, and he says here, if evolution simply means that a positive thing called an ape turned very slowly into a positive thing called a man, then it is stingless for the most orthodox. For a personal God might just as well do things slowly as quickly, especially if, like the Christian God, he were outside time. But if it means anything more, it means that there is no such thing as an ape to change, and no such thing as a man for him to change into. It means that there is no such thing as a thing. At best, there is only one thing, and that is a flux of everything and anything. And when he says thing, that's the word substance is the technical metaphysical term to talk about a thing that has a distinct intelligibility and meaning and its own reality. And what Chesterton is saying here is scientific reductionism is ultimately incapable of recognizing an ape, a frog, as a reality, and instead it thinks of these things as simply a sum of parts that have been accidentally thrown together, to which we give a name, but the name is not doesn't designate something real there. It's just a practical device to allow us to organize things. But in fact, this is just an accidental conglomeration, and that means everything is an accidental conglomeration, and it means the world is just a great ocean, fluctuating mass of particles without any meaning, and that's obviously, in fact, not only repulsive to Christians, but nobody really believes that. In fact, no one does. When we speak about evolution, we talk about an ape eventually evolving into a man, and we think that there is such a thing as an ape, and there is such a thing as a man. And so to put it simply, in the end, it seems to me that there are three alternatives. One, you can say that the world is just flux, and there is nothing meaningful. Even the words that I'm saying, that there is nothing meaningful, don't mean anything. It's really a self-undermining position. Two, that things are that there are such things as things that we can recognize and come to know, and we say that the reason that there are such things is because of eternal forms. This was the pagan metaphysical view that you can't construct from below realities, but they have to be given as such, and that would be the eternal forms. Or you have the Christian understanding, which is that what accounts for things is not merely a flux, but the creative act of God. That it's a creative act that operates through the workings of nature, but what God creates is things in this particular way. And so the alternative is either meaningless flux, eternal forms, or a creative God. We have no other alternative. And the one that seems to make the most sense, I would argue, is the Christian notion of God.
There's a lot to unpack there, but I want to complete this thought, if I can, by jumping straight to the next question, but there's much that we need to unpack. In the preface of the book, to draw us back to this earlier citation, you write, quote, "The present book seeks to defend the idea that a recovery of the whole breadth of reason is the only adequate response to the problems of modernity." And this is something that you also return to at the conclusion of the book, or near the end, with the chapter titled "The Problem of Ontotheology." What have we lost today in the modern era by losing our metaphysics?
Right. The metaphysical act. This is something that Balthasar says. It's an assent to being. It's a saying yes to reality and receiving reality as a gift. That's at the heart of the metaphysical act. Metaphysics, in a technical sense, is a particular branch of philosophy, but in a broader sense, it means it's the Catholic sense of reason, this aspiration to affirm the reality of things. And in the modern world, modernity began by in a certain sense, limiting the claims of reason. We want to not bother ourselves with these ultimate questions, but let's just figure out the way things work. And that seems to be modest, but what happens is, as soon as reason loses this aspiration to the whole, it becomes a kind of titanic force, and it has a natural tendency simply to overtake our thinking in every other sphere, and we've got ample evidence of that. So the recovering a sense of metaphysics is a recovery of a sense of the intrinsic meaning of things, the intrinsic goodness of things, recognizing things as having a kind of nature and a reality in themselves that we, before we do anything with them, we receive gratefully, affirm, and love. And that right there is the beginning of metaphysics in this broader sense.
At the heart of this divide between our materialistic culture, which doesn't really have a metaphysics or claims not to have a metaphysics, and between this proposal that you're making in your text, The Catholicity of the Reason, how is it that we can understand the world so differently today? And how is it that whole groups and whole societies can go about their business not really thinking the way the other thinks? Where is that divide located?
In a certain sense, it's not so much that we understand the world differently. It's that we have given up the project of understanding. We now are concerned much more with doing things and achieving things and making things and solving problems, and we have lost a desire simply to understand what things are. And if you look at the classical tradition, we've projected back into the tradition this sense that of a radical pluralism, that everyone had different ideas about the nature of reality, and that modernity is simply a recognition that these questions can't be resolved, and so let's give them up and attend to more practical matters. But in fact, there's an extraordinary unity of thinking in the classical tradition. The differences are very fine and intelligible, but there's a common root, and it seems to me, in fact, that common root becomes apparent the moment we give priority to this question of understanding reality, simply knowing what things are. The number of self-evident truths is extraordinary, and we've in a sense trained ourselves to be skeptical of that, but it really requires a kind of a brainwashing. I mentioned C.S. Lewis earlier, and I come back to him on this point. The Abolition of Man is really an extraordinary book, and he speaks there of this body of self-evident truth that we've lost a sense of, and we recover it. We don't have to convince anyone about it because it's self-evident. We simply have to open ourselves up to this desire to understand, and these things become evident once again.
Professor Schindler, on a practical level, if what you argue for in the text is correct, how would one go about, simply as a cultural project, how would one go about educating society or even the church in this argument that you're making for in the Catholicity of Reason?
Right. One thing is that we need to unmask the duplicity, if that's not too strong a word, in the claims of modernity not to be answering these ultimate questions. That we think that we have this illusion that we can get along with basic patterns in modern culture because as long as the political order separates itself from big questions of religion, as long as science doesn't try to answer the big questions, then it's fine, as long as they remain modest. But in fact, the very presuppositions in that separation are a claim about the meaning of reality. And that, as you mentioned before, that's something that would have to be unpacked, and I urge your audience to think, to ponder these questions. This is something. This is a lifelong project, really. But these are not neutral. Modernity is not neutral as it claims. It's making a distinct judgment about the fundamental nature of reality. And when we realize that, it seems to me that opens up this window into a larger picture. We can't avoid asking ultimate questions, so let's ask them properly and in a way that receives the great tradition that has spoken on these questions in the light of the faith that we can't bracket out, that concerns every aspect of our lives, and reacquire some of these basic dispositions of gratitude and wonder, which is a big theme in the book, and love and affirmation, assent, and gift. all of these basic notions that are part of what I try to express in that phrase, Catholicity of Reason.
Dr. Schindler, if we can close with a question that we've been asking all of those we've interviewed on this program, and that is this: what would it mean for the church to be united today? How would we even recognize this unity, and what is it that we can do to pursue the unity of the church?
Thank you. That's a great question and a massive question, and certainly beyond me. But to make some small effort at it, it seems to me, first of all, we need to recognize that unity is not simply, in the first place, just a matter of sentiment and mutual respect and so forth. Obviously, those are indispensable, that we respect differences, but we have to understand that unity, it's not only of the heart but also of the mind. St. Paul spoke of a homonoia, the sameness of mind, a unity of mind, a community of mind. So this recovery of this body of self-evident truth, and again, the Catholicity of Reason, it seems to me, is part of recovering unity. But but that doesn't mean that unity is simply a convergence of opinions. It's not we who create unity, but unity is first given to us. And as Christians, we have to recognize that the foundation of unity is Christ Himself. The Church. The unity of the church is given by Christ in his sacrificial act. And I can only answer this question as a Catholic. It seems to me that the Eucharist is the objective fruit of this. The Eucharist is not something that we doesn't simply have a meaning that we give it. It's given by Christ, and it has an objectivity that's there that calls us to together in order to receive it. So I would say unity, recovery of unity, is a recovery of tradition and sacrament as the foundation, the objective foundation that brings us together and allows us to come together both in our hearts and in our minds.
It has been our delight today to be speaking with Dr. David Schindler, Associate Professor of Metaphysics and Anthropology at the Pontifical John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and Family at the Catholic University of America. He's also the author of the text we've been discussing today, The Catholicity of Reason. Dr. Schindler, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.